Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 80 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me is my fellow traveller along the therapeutic highway, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for asking, Rory. Hopefully you are well too. It is beautiful in the United Kingdom at this time of year. It is summer. The birds are shining, Rory, and the sun is singing. Or have I got that the wrong way around?
Well, it may be. That's how they do things in Warrington, Ken.
So, episode 80, what can you expect today? A goodie. We start off by looking at a very serious topic. We're looking at domestic abuse, going on to practice matters. And Rory, you're going to be looking at trauma-informed practice. Give us a taster of that.
Yes, I'm going to be arguing strongly that we need a little bit more sometimes with our clients than just the meta model that we study. And I'm going to be talking why we need that. And it's going to be the theme, really, of the whole podcast. So really keep listening.
It is indeed, and it weaves its way through to our third topic that we're going to be looking at today, episode 80, where we're going to be looking at cognitive dissonance. But opening up with that serious topic, Rory, domestic abuse, it's something we're likely to have present in our counselling room during our career. It
is, Ken. And I'd like to make a plea before I go into the kind of material, if you like. If you're listening to this, just share it. Just share this information and to everybody. Put it on your timelines, in your Twitter feeds, your Instagrams, anywhere you can post it, because it may very well save someone's life. It's as blunt as that.
Yeah.
It's no secret that we record these podcasts in advance. So I do the research for a lot of these, and then we record the podcast. I'm going to give you some figures, Ken. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can guess the figures.
Okay.
I was absolutely knocked out when I read the figures. So if I ask you, how many women are killed by a partner or an ex-partner every week in England and Wales, how many would you say?
I would struggle to say one. I think that is such a horrific crime. I would imagine that even one person would make national press headlines. Yeah,
that's 2 women every single week.
Wow. It is just frightening. It's frightening.
Yeah. Of all crime, what percentage is domestic violence? So if you think of all crime as 100% of the cake,
yes.
What percentage of that cake is domestic violence?
If I had hazarded a guess, I would say maybe 1 to 2%. And again, I say this based on the fact that you don't hear a lot about it. You don't see a lot about it covered in the media.
10%.
Wow.
10%
shocking.
Of all recorded crime is domestic violence.
That is shocking.
It's just I was stunned when I read these figures. How many calls an hour do you think the police receive regarding domestic violence?
I'm not even going to hazard a guess, Rory. Give us the answer.
Well, 100.
An hour?
An hour.
Wow. And
where gender is recorded, and I won't ask you the questions here, but when gender is recorded, 92.1%, 92,851 of the defendants were male and 7.9 were female.
Wow.
That's what was recorded. Remember, that's what the police investigated. That's not what goes on. That's just what was recorded. And also the victims, 71,706 victims were women and 16.7 were male. And let me ask you another question, Ken, and this is the one that really knocked me out. On average, how many times do you think the victim will say tries to leave the abuser?
Tries to leave.
Tries to leave, yeah. No, attempts to leave.
Attempts to leave. I'm not sure. I know that there is a pattern of staying in abusive relationships. We've discussed it before. But I would like to imagine that they leave once and they're gone and they don't come back, but I'm sure that's not the case at all.
Between 7 to 8.
Yeah. Yeah, so sad.
It is. And the reason that I bring these statistics, and we'll put if you go to our mother page, we will put the statistics in and the links to where I've got these from. I got some of the information from our friends at Women's Aid, do a fantastic job. One of the things that really struck me about this was that we see this presented in our therapy room in different ways. How often do we get clients who allude maybe to domestic violence or allude to the fact they might want to leave the partner? And men, in the past, I've come across men who've been survivors of domestic abuse. And it's something that is really a tip of the iceberg thing. It's one of those things where we have to sharpen up, I think, our clinical thinking, because sometimes clients give us the clues and they're so subtle we just don't hear them. And I do think that sometimes we just need to really pay attention, because when clients come to us, sometimes they're trying to tell us something. And with these sort of statistics, makes me think that with better listening, we may be able to connect better with clients who are suffering domestic abuse.
I think for me, what's really important here is to define what domestic abuse is. And when I think domestic abuse, the first picture that comes in my mind is a horrific picture of somebody physically harming somebody else. But it's not always so. It can be emotional abuse. It can be use of power or money. If one of the people within the relationship is not working, withholding money, it can take many different forms. It doesn't have to necessarily be hitting.
No, threats to children. This new abuse of taking intimate pictures and threatening to stick them on the internet.
Yeah,
is a form of it, and also something called gaslighting, which is I don't know if anybody's aware. There was a film called Gaslight. That's where you get the term from. It's filmed in the 1950s, and it was about a man who was trying to get his wife sectioned, and he would just do things like turning the gas lights on and off. And then she said, "Are the lights going on and off?" And he'd go, "No, that's just in your mind." And and I've known people who've been gaslighted. Really simple things like going to the bathroom, finding the window open, and then saying, "Have you opened the window?" And the guy goes, "No." That type of thing. And it just chips and chips and chips and chips away at the ability for people, and it's men and women, to be able to kind of trust their own instincts. And it is a form of domestic abuse, and it's getting bigger. It's a subtle form, but it's just as effective, because effectively the person just loses their decision-making capacity because they can't trust themselves.
Really disempowers the people involved in it. And I recognize as well, when you were speaking about how many times, looking at those statistics, how many times does somebody leave, that there is a tie-in to the relationship. Having worked with this topic on a number of occasions, it's there's two sides to it. There is the one side, which is maybe the really loving, caring partner, and maybe the partner is that way most of the time, but they have that side. And you get those clues, as you mentioned, Rory, or, sometimes when he drinks too much, then he can get a little bit out of hand. Could be a little bit of a clue there. And what can happen is that the person who is on the receiving end of the abuse really loves their partner dearly for that one side of them, that great person that they really are. So when the other side shows and it plays out to its conclusion and the abuse has happened, afterwards there can be feelings of remorse, regret from the abuser, saying how this will never happen again. They don't know how they found themselves in that situation. That's it now. I'm not going to drink that much anymore. You're going to see, I love you so much. And it's very easy to believe and buy back into that, because I guess the abuser at the time of saying that really does mean it. They really do feel that regret and that remorse. And the person on the receiving side really loves that person. So it's understandable that you can feel yourself trapped in that situation, but sadly it tends to repeat itself again and again and again, and it doesn't get better over time. The gaps between incidents tend to get shorter.
Yeah, and one of the things, I had a friend for many years who counselled at a woman's refuge, and one of the things that they really worried about was that as the woman recovered from the physical bruises,
Yes.
the knock and the breaks and that type of thing, that as they'd feel physically stronger, they'd believe that they could handle the person, the abuser. I'm strong enough now to handle him.
Yeah.
And as my friend said on a number of occasions, he's not changed.
Yeah.
He's not changed. Unless he does some form of therapy like you're doing and tries to sort out why he gets to this position, then the same thing happens again. And this is why we see this secular returning back to the abuser, and then the abuser goes back into form again, and then the person leaves, and it goes round just for those reasons, Ken. And we'll be covering a bit more in depth in the last topic of the podcast why that is. There is a theory around it, which I'm going to discuss. Definitely.
I think when it comes to working with this kind of presentation, it's tricky, and again, not maybe for the novice counsellor. Definitely be looking to take this to supervision. If you have managerial supervision within your placement, take it to managerial supervision as well. Take it to maybe peer discussion. Get as much feedback and input as you can on this. Because it can be tricky to work with, specifically if you have harm to self, harm to others as a reason for breaking confidentiality within your organization. You need to make that very clear in your initial contracting that you would have to break confidentiality if the person said, I was being physically abused. But the other side of that is, how do you build up the trust that they feel safe enough to be able to tell you this if there is that fear that this confidentiality may be broken? The thing with domestic abuse is it is a hidden secret. It is hidden away from others. I walked into the door. There's a song by Suzanne Vega called My Name is Luca, and it's about a child who is hit. And if you listen to the lyrics of that song, it's all the reasons this child gives for why they have the bruises. It's tricky to work with.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Susan Vega released another song about Luca in the future.
I haven't heard that one. I'll look out for that one. So I guess
I know the song of it, but she released it, and it got quite critical acclaim. So yes, to sum up, there is help out there.
Yes.
So we're going to put some links into the mother page, and it will tell you a lot about the help that can be accessed. It may be, Ken, we don't know who listens to this podcast. It may be that there's someone going through this situation right now, that might be listening to this podcast. So we'll put the links in, and you can go and have a look and maybe make some decisions around that.
Thank you very much. Great topic that you brought today, Rory. And as Rory said at the head of this, please share this. If ever there was an episode to share, this is the one. Share it with your peers. Get the word out there. Go and get those links. It's about being prepared. If somebody should appear in your room and suggest that they are being abused in some way, that you have the referral links to be able to help them on hand. It's about that, being prepared, thinking about it beforehand. And of course, if you want to get in on the conversations and the topics we discuss here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, you can do so by going to our Facebook group. It is a group with it's over 17,000 people at the moment, students of counselling and psychotherapy from all around the world. We've got some tutors in there as well, and some qualified therapists that hang out, and we talk about, this is the kind of stuff that we talk about in a moderated environment. And you can find our Facebook group by going onto Facebook and typing in Counselling Tutor. We're right there at the top. You knock on the door, we will let you in. So thank you very much for that first topic. Rory, we're looking at something really important now. We're going into, of course, practice matters, and we're going to be looking at trauma, which again links into what we've just been speaking about, a human being going through trauma, but trauma linked to practice.
Yes, I'm going to be talking about trauma-informed practice. I've given some lectures in the CSR, our academic library. We've got a couple of lectures in there about how to prepare to work with people who may be survivors of abuse. But I'm also going to be talking a little bit, I'm going to be controversial. I'm going to say that with what we know now, we may need some extra skills to practice effectively. And I'm going to be sharing what those skills are, and maybe just how they push against the tide of the model that you could be studying. So a bit of an interesting debate. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Let's get straight into that. It is Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
In the first part of this podcast, Ken and myself discussed domestic abuse. The figures, as you heard, are stark. It left me wondering if the models of therapy that are taught in colleges and universities really cover the issues and experiences of modern-day clients. Does the thinking behind these theories take into account the huge body of knowledge that is now known about how the brain processes trauma? Up until 1980, post-traumatic stress disorder as a diagnosis did not exist. It was seen as a wide-ranging set of disparate presentations such as alcoholism, self-harm and anger management issues. It was only when clinicians joined the dots of the wide-ranging difficulties Vietnam veterans were facing that they realised these symptoms were symptomatic of the way the brain processed trauma. More to the point, in terms of trauma responses, clinicians began to understand that the way the brain processes trauma in humans is fairly universal. Be it a former soldier who has flashbacks to the war when he hears a firework going off, or the adult who becomes terrified when she smells the cologne her abuser used when she was a child. In the last 15 years, we know more about the brain and how it processes trauma than since humanity began. Yet the models of therapy taught make little or no reference to this. The reason being that some theorists were mostly dead before this new research became known and accepted. So what is the solution? Well, a relatively new idea in the world in counselling and psychotherapy is the term called trauma-informed practice, sometimes referred to as psychological education. This is where the practitioner, when appropriate, shares information on how the brain processes trauma. This is a useful response to clients who say they feel ashamed that they did not fight back or run away when being abused. Explaining to them that in traumatic situations, part of the brain goes into a form of automatic pilot as a survival strategy, the general default option being to freeze or feign death. Or the client who is conflicted because he felt pleasure while being abused and convinced himself that somehow he must have wanted it. Explaining to them that the part of the brain that processes sexual pleasure is disconnected from the part of the brain that mediates right and wrong can be very powerful and take away feelings of shame and guilt. The term "this is not your fault" cannot be underestimated as a therapeutic response. So I make this case. While models of therapy have been proven to help and alleviate mental and emotional distress, using a trauma-informed intervention may very well provide a form of heavy lifting, moving the weight and shame of the client's natural responses to a traumatic event. With this debris cleared, the client can begin the journey of self-healing, unburdened by the shame and conflict of their brain's natural responses, programmed to help them survive trauma.
Thank you, as always, Rory. And of course, Rory always creates a super duper handout that goes with Practice Matters, and you can get that by going to our mother website, and that is counsellingtutor.com. When you get to the website, just click on the podcast tab. You'll find that right at the top of the page, going through to the podcast. This is episode 80. Click on episode 80. All the show notes for today's episode are there, including all the links we spoke about at the beginning of today's episode. And of course, Rory's handout can be downloaded from within the page. If, of course, you are a member of our paid-for resources, which is called the Counselling Study Resource, then you can just log into your handouts vault, and the handout has already been added for you. And if you're listening to this and thinking, what is this paid-for resource? Well, we give more information about that at the end of today's episode, so stay tuned. And it's interesting going over looking at trauma, in person-centered theory, Rory, we're always saying that it's about the individual, their unique perspective on the world, how they see it. It's their subjective view of the world. But there's so much commonality when it comes to trauma it's like that collective feeling, so many people feeling the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that it's super helpful that people know. You wouldn't believe, Ken, the relief people get when you say to them, A, it's not your fault, and B, given that situation, most people would feel like you do. It's a weight lifter.
It is, and I just want to once again just echo that there is a phenomenal lecture on this. If you're a member of the Counselling Study Resource, there is a 2-part lecture on working with trauma and working with clients who have experienced sexual abuse. It is there. It is CPD certified, so you can get your certificate for that. That is well worth having a look at if you are a member of our paid for resource. But let's leave that behind, moving on, but yet staying with the same topic, Rory, as we look at cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, well, we're going to lighten, given the material we've talked about so far in the podcast, I'm going to lighten it a little bit and talk about the work of Leon Festinger, an American psychologist, a social psychologist, someone who studies how groups of people interact. And in 1957, he embedded himself with a group of people who believed the world was going to come to an end because a flying saucer was going to land. I've got my tinfoil hat on here, Ken, and whistling the X-Files tune. And they were going to, they literally believed that the world was going to come to an end. And what was going to happen is they were going to be saved and everybody else was going to die and they were going to come down and repopulate the world. And he embedded himself with these people and took notes. And it's hilarious. He actually had to run to the toilet to make his field notes. And then he'd come back. He must have thought, he must have had a bit of a bowel problem, maybe, because he was in and out of the toilet. But what was really interesting about this is that the people who believed the world was going to come to an end, they were ordinary folk. One was a professor at university. They were ordinary people, and they fell under the spell of Marion Quiche. Marion Quiche was a woman who channeled this alien jargon and spoke in this alien voice. It sounds odd, I know, but this is exactly what happened. And she predicted that on the 23rd of December, the alien was going to come down and at 12 o'clock and whisk them away in a flying saucer. The world was going to come to an end. And as such, they would come back and then repopulate the world, that type of thing. So 12 o'clock came, and of course the alien didn't turn up. Got 12:15. There was a bit of an argument around the clock. Some people thought the clock was a bit slow, so they waited till 12:15, and the alien didn't turn up. And everybody was getting a bit kind of vexed about this because, they'd literally, some of the people had sold their possessions and everything, ready to be whisked away into the celestial orbit. And she went away, and she had another chat with Zargon, came back, and said, right, okay. So I've had a word with Zargon. I don't think she actually says it like this in the book. This is me paraphrasing like mad for humour. And said, Zargon said he's not going to destroy the world, but what you need to do is tell, we're being spared, but you need to tell everybody we're being spared and we need to change things. And those people phoned up radio stations and said, I've been saved by this alien, and can you broadcast what needs to be changed? And cognitive dissonance is that act of where we know something isn't right, but we've invested so much into it that we don't want to leave. And it really does link into what we now know is called trauma bonding, and where people don't leave abusive situations because of the investment. And there's a really good quote on this, and it basically says, cognitive dissonance occurs when humans experience a state of holding two or more contradictory thoughts or belief in their cognition at one time. The result is a state of anxious confusion and a desire to reduce the resultant overwhelm and unbalanced perception, which is why a lot of people go back to their abusers, because they've invested so much. And nowadays, as I say, professionally, we call that trauma bonding.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. So Festinger, cognitive dissonance theory suggests that we have an inner drive to hold all our attitudes and behaviors in harmony and avoid disharmony or dissonance. And I can definitely relate to it. I mean, you speak about linking that to domestic abuse and why people might go back, but we can see that if we look to self as well. So I can definitely see it in myself. I want to go and run 3 times a week because I know that by running I'm going to improve my health, it's going to make me feel better, and hopefully I might get some extra life out of it at the end because I live a more healthy life. Yet when it comes time to run, I don't want to go and run, and I've got this fight inside me of I know I want to run but I know I shouldn't run, and it's like a dis-ease that is caused within self.
Yeah, exactly that. And sometimes we know it as buyer's remorse. You buy something, you bring it home, and you think, "Oh, that's expensive," and then you think, "I should." And then you have this kind of disease which you look at, and then usually what happens is you make a really good reason up why you bought this thing, and justify it to yourself. And that is played out in relationships, as you said earlier, Ken. He loves me. He's not always like that.
Yes.
He or she is very good with the children, or this type of thing. If only I didn't make so many mistakes, type of behavior. And that is cognitive dissonance. And again, it's something we see played out in the therapy room, and something that, as I say, links to my earlier piece on psychological education and trauma-informed practice.
So it's an interesting topic and something we can look at, and I guess in a way it relates into incongruence, where you have one feeling inside showing something differently outside. I'm sure the people standing there waiting for the alien Zorg to come, at some level deep inside were going, am I really buying into this? But like you say, they'd invested so much and within the group that they were going along with it. And there's so many experiments that show within a group how we can very easily buy into, even if we don't really buy in, we will go along with the group and ignore that inner discomfort that we feel, that gut feel, that compass that kind of directs us.
Absolutely, Ken. I can attest to this. Many years ago, I was invited, before Manchester City, the football team in the UK, became a top-flight Premier League football team. I was invited to watch a football match at Main Road, where they were. And I'm not a football follower. I've only ever been to 2 football matches. And I went with my friend, and it was fascinating. They were doing really poorly. I think they were going to go into Division 2 at the time. And people would pay to go in and say, "This is awful. This is just the worst. I don't know why I come here every week. They never win. The players are awful." They talked about the ref's parentage. His parents weren't married. And didn't say that. They said a few other words. But that's cognitive dissonance. They were paying good money to watch their team lose every week, and they were watched it literally week in, week out. And that dissonance was very, very noticeable, where people were going, "I don't know how come." And what it was, I was just in the second year of training. The people sat around me were really depressed. They were depressed. Their emotions were reduced.
Yes.
And they were stuck between not supporting the team they'd supported for years and that investment, and paying this money and the disappointment they were getting. That's cognitive dissonance.
It's so interesting how it just it leads itself into this that we call the human condition, who we are as humans. And you see it all the time in business as well, where somebody will start a business, they will be losing money hand over fist. It's just not working. But they think, maybe if I just work a bit harder, if I go in earlier, if I take a bigger loan, if I readjust the shelves, there's always that bargaining. But yet inside, they know it's not going to work. It's an interesting concept. How might we work with that? Well, how might we see that presented in our therapy room, and then how might we work with it?
Well, I think, Ken, that people will say things like, I know that he's hit me, and I know he does this, and I know he does that, but he really loves me. And I think sometimes that's about high challenge, high support.
Yeah.
And saying, I hear that, and I hear that you love him very much, or her, But it seems to me he continues to do this. And how is he or she going to change? What work is he or she doing?
Yeah.
And holding the mirror up is about the reality, which is what therapists do. And also, as I said earlier, the saying that, lots of people in your situation feel the same as you do. You're not the only person. Because I think that sometimes abuse and that what goes with it is isolation. And when people realise that they're not alone, changes can be made.
Wow. What an episode. The theme has run strongly through episode 80, Counselling Tutor Podcast, starting off by looking at domestic abuse, looking at trauma-informed practice in Practice Matters, and of course, cognitive dissonance.
Yes, and if any of these topics are affecting you or someone you know, if you Google Women's Aid, just www.womensaid, and just hit it into Google, you'll find lots of resources to support you. Websites will come up. And as always, stay grounded. and stay safe.
Take care. If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, then you will love the Counselling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Lees-Oakes to give you the support you need during your counselling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counsellingtutor.com/CSR. That's counsellingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.